Good morning. It's 9:15. I'm Ruthie Landau. I'm the Virginia Apgar Professor of Anesthesiology, the Director of Obstetric Anesthesia at Columbia University in New York, and I am the Editor-in-Chief of the International Journal of Obstetric Anesthesia, which is relevant for this presentation. Thank you for coming to this special session, I would say, on how to write, review, and publish. We wanted to have a session that would sort of cover what it takes to design a great study, get it to be analyzed and written up, then how to review a paper if you become a reviewer, which I highly encourage you to consider. And then we'll talk a little bit about the editorial landscape, although I'll give you a few pointers to that at the beginning of the presentation and at the end of the session. And I'm just going to go rapidly over the objectives, which were presented in the book. Understand the key principle of study design, data analysis, and outcomes reporting. Review the editorial process from trial registration, very important, pre-registration to publication. And we won't probably have too much time, although we'll take questions about new tools and technology that enhance the editorial process and improve dissemination of research. I can tell you I could have not had better panelists, speakers for this session. For those of you who are starstruck, I'm sure all of you, I couldn't have found better speakers this morning. We have Professor Brian Bateman, who's the Professor and Chair of the Department of Anesthesiology, Perioperative and Pain Medicine at Stanford. And he is here in some form of representation as an associate editor of anesthesiology, also an editor of the Chestnut textbook. I can put a plug since I'm not really involved with the textbook other than being an author in it, but the 7th edition just got published. There's a superb textbook that is circulating that has been on display at the booth. And I will just put out there, I know you can't really see it very well. It was intentional. It's a bit blurry there, but you have both of our panelists, authors of landmark papers in the biggest, most impactful journals in the field of medicine, the New England Journal and JAMA and other journals. And I just put there a selection of one paper for each, but there are many. So Brian Bateman will talk about how to design your study and conduct impactful research. And then Brian will be followed by Professor Wong, who's Professor and Chair and the Department Executive Officer of Anesthesia at the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine. Cynthia Wong is here as a handling editor of the International Journal of Obstetric Anesthesia, as an editorial board member of the British Journal of Anesthesia, and one of the editors of the Chestnut textbook. So I wanted to reframe. You're here because you're probably interested as a researcher, an author, maybe a reviewer, maybe an editor. I see some editors here in the room. I wanted to go back and reflect. What's research? I was delighted to see that the etymology of the word research comes from French. For those of you who don't know, French is my first language, hence the little accent. And it comes from the word recherche, search again, the research, recherche. So it is an iterative process. And research, the concept originated from curiosity. We're all curious. You're here at 9 o'clock in the morning because you're curious and you have a desire to expand knowledge. I think of it as an opportunity, a tremendous opportunity to answer a question, to solve a problem, to collaborate, and ultimately to do good, right? We're here because we want to improve patient care. So it's an opportunity and it's also a responsibility. We have to do it right. If we don't do the research right, it is really a problem. So we need to identify a gap that is an important one, formulate a hypothesis, design a study, generate information, synthesize the findings, and think about the next steps. And as I said, it's an iterative process. So what's the editorial landscape? So again, nowadays, there's so much information. There is so much research that is conducted, and there's so many publications. You have to think of your work as being current, pertinent, thought-provoking, while being relevant and practical. If you are a clinician scientist, you have to think about how this is going to translate and transform clinical care. If you are a basic science scientist, you have to think about the translation into something that's going to be clinically relevant. So it has to be ethically and scientifically sound. It has to be meaningful for the readership, whether they are clinicians and or researchers. And it has, this is the editorial landscape, has to be responsive to the needs and expectations of its authorship, reviewers, editors, and readership. And the readership can be any. So we're all probably in this room just as much authors, reviewers, some of us are editors. And so it is a cycle, which is why I've used this several times in my presentation. So as an editor, a relatively new editor, or editor-in-chief, I've been an editor for a while, but again, the iterative process from the question to the study to the draft, now to the review, to the revision, and for those of you who submit papers, there is a back and forth between the review and the revision multiple times, and don't take it as, they don't like my paper, take it as an opportunity to improve the content, the message, hopefully not too much of the content, but the way it is presented and the messaging. And then once it is published, it doesn't end there. You want your work, you've probably spent years on it, to be disseminated, to be impactful, to result in change. And yes, there are ways to achieve that with social media. And people think of Twitter usually, although we know that Twitter has been transformed into X, and there's some issues with X. And so it does seem like in today's landscape, a better way or a good way to disseminate information is to go on potentially other channels, present your work. We have seen, and I don't have a slide to show that, but we have seen that papers that have an additional component to their publication, whether it is an editorial. So this is the editor's role to editorialize, to provide a context, to amplify the message, also to amplify the caveats of a study. You can have an editorial. You can have, now journals have podcasts. There are other ways, visual infographics, and anything in the paper that has a visual representation increases the likelihood that it will be utilized in other publications, in editorials, in chestnut chapters, in textbooks, or also on LinkedIn and other channels, which I will not mention this minute. So it is now my distinct pleasure to invite Dr. Brian Breitman, who will tell us how to write an impactful manuscript.
Thank you, Ruthie, for the invitation to be part of this this panel, and thank you all for coming out on an early Tuesday morning. So these are the topics I want to cover. So some high-level thoughts about how to conduct impactful research. I'm then going to share my approach to writing a paper, the steps that I take in putting a paper together. I have 2 cents here, so this is my 2 cents about this. There's lots of ways to write a paper that I think could be effective, but I'll share my model, and then I want to share just a few reflections on impactful publishing, how to think about where to publish your work. So impactful research. So I think the first question is, well, why do we do research, and why is this important? And I probably don't need to tell all of you who chose to come to this session early on a Tuesday morning that research is really the foundation of our clinical practice. And I think, a really wonderful example about the impact of research can be seen in the COVID vaccines. For all the news and controversy, those were incredibly life-saving, and they were developed in about a year and really leveraged years of fundamental basic science and clinical research, decades of research in genetic sequencing, mRNA technology, nanotechnology, even RCT design, that all came together to to create a life-saving therapy. And there's, obviously lots of examples of that in terms of the research that's addressing really important questions. Another reason is that it's really deeply gratifying. I think it's been a really wonderful part of my career. It leads to lots of amazing experiences and getting to know people and working in teams, using parts of your brain that you don't get to engage necessarily in daily clinical work. And so I think that's another really important reason to do this. So what should we work on? Well, I think the first thing to say is you want to choose problems that really matter. Identify where there are gaps in knowledge, where if you generate answers, they're going to be important. There are lots of important questions that are unanswered, and I think you want to take some time as you're starting to think about your research direction to carefully consider what you want to do. It's just as hard to do a study that is not impactful as it is to do a study that works on something that really does matter. So this is the time to step back, think in a broad way. What's going to be important to the field? I also think you want to be strategic, and ideally, when you do a study, it's gonna have legs, and you're gonna want to do a follow-on study, and there's some benefit to developing infrastructure, to developing your expertise in a particular area, to really carving out a niche. And so as you start to launch your direction for your research, you want to think about an area where you think you can have a sustained series of contributions. It's hard to overstate the importance of mentorship, particularly at the beginning of your career. The stronger the mentor, the more likely it is that you'll go on to become a successful researcher. In identifying a mentor, you want someone who's accomplished, who themselves is doing outstanding research work. If your goal is to obtain funding, like NIH funding, you really want to identify a mentor that themselves has obtained that kind of funding. But I think equally important to having a successful mentor, you want a mentor who is generous with their ideas, with their time, with their resources, who will be really invested in your success. I think it's also important to meet with potential mentors and identify whether you have some chemistry. I mean, some people work better together than others, and so you want to get a feel for that before you set off on this mentor-mentee relationship. I think it's important to be explicit that the kind of relationship you're looking to establish with the mentor is that of a mentor-mentee, and be really very clear in what you're hoping to get out of the relationship. And then I wrote this: it takes a village. I think the idea that you'd have just a single mentor throughout your career is not the case. It requires lots of a really successful career requires lots of mentors that can mentor in different aspects of your work. And I'd also just encourage you to look beyond your division or your department. Oftentimes, really the most exciting research happens when someone from anesthesiology goes out and finds a mentor in another field and can work on projects bringing together new perspectives and new techniques. I think the best science is generally done in teams, where you bring together people with different areas of expertise, complementary experience, and with different methods. I also think it's a really fun way to do research when you're working together with lots of smart people on a project. That is something that can be very fulfilling. As you engage in your research, you want to find a balance of opportunities to lead, but also to be co-eyes, and so you can learn, even if you're not the first author on the paper or the senior author on the paper, you are contributing to studies and learning in that process. I mentioned this before, working at the interfaces of other fields. I think this is where really some of the most exciting work happens, and so identifying collaborators in other disciplines in medicine, or even outside of medicine, in engineering and in law. I've seen health policy. There's lots of other fields that can bring insights that are really relevant to the field of anesthesiology and perioperative medicine. And then I would just say, as you work in teams, you want to be generous with your ideas, generous with credit. I think teams that function well, there's lots of credit to go around if everyone is working together and contributing. So as you think specifically about a particular study and whether it would be worth doing, this is a criteria that's been proposed, the FINER criteria. So feasibility, important, novel, ethical, and relevant. So if you're going to do an RCT, you need to make sure that you are in a situation where you can enroll an adequate number of subjects, or similarly, if for a prospective observational study, you need to make sure you have the relevant technical expertise as part of your team, that what you're proposing to do is commensurate with the type of resourcing that you have, both in time and money, something that's manageable in scope so that you'll actually be able to get it done, and then ideally fundable, because I think to do really large-scale, impactful research, it often requires extramural funding, particularly in the environment that we're all working in now. And so identifying an idea that has potential traction with funding agencies is important. Again, you want to work on something that is important to you. You're going to spend a lot of time working on your research project, and you want to do something that you're really passionate about, but also something that other people care about, and ideally something that addresses a problem of real public health importance. That's generally the metric that funding agencies are going to use to guide their allocation of resources. So aligning with things that are impacting public health is important. You want to make sure as you're getting started that what you're doing is going to provide valuable new information. I mean, there is obviously a place for replicating findings, but in general, you want to identify or do a study that's going to confirm, refute, or extend prior findings, and that can lead to innovations in our understanding of disease and health, an impact on our medical practice, or introduce new methodologies for conducting research. Of course, ethical considerations are really important, and all of our studies need to be reviewed by institutional review boards to make sure they are ethical and have acceptable physical and or privacy risks. If you're doing an RCT where you're randomizing patients, there really needs to be equipoise, where the available evidence is insufficient to determine which of the two interventions you're proposing is better, and where there's no clear preference or bias in a field towards one intervention over the other. And then the final criteria, relevant, so has the potential for clinical or scientific impact, findings that can change practice or policy, change our understanding, or change the direction of future inquiry. So Ruthie mentioned I'm on the editorial board at Anesthesiology. I'm a handling editor now, and when we get reviews back from our expert reviewers, and are processing a decision, we have to rate manuscripts along the dimensions that you see listed here. And these are really the criteria that drive whether a manuscript is accepted for publication or not. So novelty, clinical impact, scientific impact, whether it's definitive, whether the type of study design and the approach is going to lead to definitive and trusted evidence, whether it's interesting to the specialty, whether people care about it. And then you'll notice the authenticate check complete on the bottom, all of the manuscripts that come through anesthesiology, and I think really all journals at this point go through authenticate, which is a plagiarism detector. Okay, in terms of executing on your study, I'm not going to say a lot here. This is obviously, a very large topic, but in general, you want to have specific aims for your research, a clear hypothesis. You want to draft your protocol and statistical analysis plan that should be registered ideally prior to data access, and that's actually a requirement at anesthesiology and many other journals. Statistics are incredibly important, and my advice to all of you is to get statistical advice early in the study, it's really hard for statisticians once the study is complete to salvage something if it's inadequately powered or improperly designed. So you want to do that very early in your design phase. Pay meticulous attention to detail. This is important. You want to get things right, keep good records. And then as you move into the analytic phase, just as the statistician should be involved in designing the study, they should be involved in the analysis. So in the closing few minutes, I'm going to just talk about my approach to writing a manuscript. And again, this is just my approach and some of the principles that I aim to follow and I teach to my mentees. And I think one of the most important things, and this is true from my perspective as an investigator, but also certainly true from my perspective as an editor, is it's important that the writing is clear. I had a professor back in college that always used to have this riff on a Bible verse, and now abideth faith, hope, and clarity. These three, but the greatest of these is clarity. So you need to be clear in your language. Particularly as you're getting started, following good examples as templates. Go to an article that you think is well written, well put together. See how the authors approach constructing the paper is a great way, to write good papers. In general, you want to be concise. At the New England Journal, one of the premier journals, there's a 2,700 word limitation. You can use supplementary materials to provide more expansive explanation of your methods. But in general, you want to have a brief introduction, methods that are detailed enough that people can replicate what you're doing. And if you can't fit all of that into your primary manuscript, put that into supplement, concise results, and then a concise discussion. So when I set out to write a paper, my approach is to start with the methods. Often you'll have already prepared a analytic plan or a study protocol that can really serve as the basis for writing your methods. I then write the results, and then circle back to writing the intro and the discussions. This is key, and I think something editors are going to be paying attention to. Is there sufficient detail in the way you describe your methods so that the study could be replicated? This is the importance of being able to replicate science is something that the field has become really acutely aware of, and so having a well-written method section is obviously foundational to reproducibility. So for an observational study, these are the elements that I make sure to include in the sequencing of those. I think these slides will be available. So if you want to look at this later, you can. But in general, start with the data source, then cohort definition, exposure definition, outcome definition, the covariates you will adjust for as potential confounders or mediators, your statistical analysis approach, and then sensitivity and subgroup analyses. I think I've already said this enough times, but this is working with a statistician. There's real expertise, and to do research that is actually meaningful. You want to make sure your analytic methods are valid. If you're doing an observational study, being really attentive to confounding and thoughtful in how you design and adjust for confounders is really important as well. In results, this is again my template. So I start off discussing the characteristics of the cohort using table 1, and then describe the primary outcome results. And this is the place where I provide the most detail, maybe some discussion of key secondary outcome results, pointing to the places in the manuscript in the tables where those results are presented. Then sensitivity and subgroup analyses. In the written part of the results section, the goal is really to highlight some of the key statistics. You're not going to repeat everything that's in your tables, but you want to highlight some of the key findings and make sure that what you're describing follows in sequence with what's described in the methods, tables, and figures. So after the results is written, I circle back to the intro, making an argument for why this, and really the intro is your spot to make an argument for why your study matters. Generally, I use a 3-paragraph format, some very, very brief background on the area that I'm studying, the state of the evidence, again, very, very brief, but your goal is to build an argument for why your study is needed, why the new data that you're presenting is going to be impactful, and then finally state the objective or the study hypothesis. And then once you have the methods, results, and introduction, I cycle back to writing the discussion. In the discussion, I lead with a paragraph that just summarizes at a high level what was done, what was found, why it's important. The second paragraph, I describe the implications for the findings. The third paragraph, compare with previous evidence, and a nice lead into that is our findings confirm and extend prior findings, comparing X and Y. Then get into the strengths of the study. So our study has several important strengths, and you can delineate the strengths. The limitations of the study, and this is a really important paragraph. Every study design, every study that's conducted has limitations, and it's important to be very transparent and clear about those. And ideally, when you discuss the limitations, you also want to discuss approaches that you use to mitigate those limitations, or why the limitations are unlikely to be a major threat to the validity of your findings. And then finally, a conclusion where you restate the main findings and some of the important implications, maybe with a sentence or two looking forward to follow-on studies that are needed in an area. Okay, and then finally, impactful publications. Now you have your paper, you are thinking about where to submit it. Part of this is guided by the topic and the fit, but also where you want to be read as an author. If you do a high-quality study, you want to aim to publish it in a high-quality journal. High-quality journals are more likely to be read. They're more likely for the findings to be integrated into guidelines. It's likely to have an effect on the impact of your work. As you're getting started, working with mentors and colleagues to figure out what a good fit might be. But my advice is, in general, aim high initially. The worst thing that can happen is the paper gets rejected. It might get rejected after getting reviews from some real experts that can help you refine your presentation as you submit it to other journals. I think one of the things we can do in our field is to look at GenMed journals more. I think there are work that we do that is of interest to the broader field of medicine, and when we do that work, I think looking at JAMA, New England Journal, Lancet, BMJ, those types of journals may be really the best fit, and it's been, I think, gratifying to see more and more OB anesthesia or research from OB anesthesiologists published in those places. OB journals are often a great spot for some of the work that we do. A lot of our work is obviously relevant to our obstetrical colleagues and some of it to our peds colleagues as well. I think one of the things as an editor that is can be bothersome is this concept of salami slicing. So people dividing their studies into the minimal publishable unit and publishing on the impact of a certain block on surgery on the right arm and then a subsequent paper on the left arm. That's not the kind of work you want to be associated with. It's better to publish a single comprehensive study in a higher impact journal than many manuscripts in less impactful journals. And so thinking about, really pulling together a meaningful body of work and publishing that together in one place, I think is a route towards greater impact. Okay, so just to wrap up, research matters. It is, again, the foundation of our clinical practice. It's the way we advance the specialty. And as we do research, we want it to have impact. And so to accomplish that, we want to work on important questions, use the best methods for study design and analysis, write the paper well in a way that is clear, and then publish as impactfully as possible. So thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, we are going to move on a little bit to writing a good peer review. And this follows on to a lot of what Dr. Bateman said, so I think it'll hopefully be helpful to you. So my disclosures, some of them were already mentioned. I am a handling editor for IJOA and on the editorial board of the British Journal of Anesthesia, and I am a guest reviewer for lots of other journals. So what is peer review? Peer review is the critical assessment of manuscripts submitted to journals by experts who are usually not part of the editorial staff. So for IJOA, for example, Ruthie is the editor-in-chief. I am one of the handling editors, and when we receive a manuscript, we send it out to experts in the field to review, because the editors don't all have expertise, right, in everything that's submitted to us. So we wanted the manuscript to be reviewed by somebody who has expertise. The purpose of the peer review is so the manuscript gets a fair hearing. It helps the editors make a decision. And I think a very important part of reviewing it helps improve the quality of the reporting. So one of the jobs of the reviewer, Ruthie already mentioned this, is to help make the manuscript better. Good review helps the authors make the manuscript better. It helps the editors decide whether to accept the manuscript and to put it into good shape. And it definitely helps the readers understand the manuscript. Improve clarity, as Brian mentioned, is an important part of what reviewers help authors and editors do. And increasingly, unfortunately, reviewers help spot misconduct. So we won't go into this, but I will tell you that I have spotted a fair amount of misconduct by reading manuscripts, and it's a little bit disheartening, but it's part of our job. What are the ethics of peer reviewing? Well, the peer reviewer needs to disclose possible conflicts of interest. We actually have a pretty small community. I know a lot of the people who are writing manuscripts. They know me. And I may be doing work that's related to them. I'm a peer reviewer, right? Peer means I'm an expert in that area. And so I think disclosing your possible conflicts, I published with this person before in this area, other conflicts is important. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be the reviewer, right? It just means that you need to disclose what your possible conflicts are. Another no-no is not to use the knowledge of the work to further your own interests or publications. All right, so you don't steal somebody else's research ideas, basically what that amounts to. And this has also happened, right? So this is the ethics of peer reviewing. We are privileged to have early knowledge of somebody's work, and it's our responsibility not to take advantage of that. And related to that is confidentiality, right? So as reviewers, again, we have knowledge ahead of time of this study and the results of this study. And it is our responsibility to keep that confidential until it's published. And we should destroy all copies that we have or delete copies of the manuscript after they've been reviewed. This is just to make the point that we should not be announcing our peer reviews on social media. All right, so why should we do peer reviewing? Well, I think it's our responsibility as scientists or physician scientists. It's a responsibility to our colleagues. It's a responsibility to the consumers or the patients of the work, and it is service work to our profession that I think is important to again, further the knowledge and the work of our profession. I think if you are an author, you need to be a reviewer. All right, and I will tell you, I get really annoyed as a handling editor when I send a paper to review from someone who has been an author at our journal, I know have expertise, and they turn me down. And I will not look as favorably on their paper as an editor the next time around, because you didn't do your part of supporting the community, right? So I know we all get overwhelmed, or many of us get overwhelmed with requests to review, but you have to do so. If you want to be an author and a researcher, you have to do reviewing. That's just what it comes down to. Another reason to do it is there is a lot of self-learning involved, right? So I rarely read a paper without having to look something up, look at the references, even if it's my area of expertise. The author often says something and I think, is that quite right? And I have to go back and read the original paper, and we learn a lot by doing that. So there is a tremendous amount of self-learning. Most of the journals these days will give credit in the form of CME. There are also other organizations. Clarivate is one that keep track of journals when reviews are done. And so you get academic credit, and this can go into your CV, right? And it should help towards your promotion when this is your service activity to the profession. All right, what are the responsibilities of the reviewer? Well, we have to have the requisite expertise. And if we are sent a paper that we don't have expertise for, we should just tell the editor, this is outside of my area of expertise, and I don't think I can provide a quality review. It is important for us to be timely, all right, to get them done in a timely fashion. And to, as we mentioned before, identify potential conflicts of interest. And the golden rule is pretty obvious, right? We as reviewers should treat other manuscripts as we want our own manuscripts to be treated. That's pretty straightforward. Okay, so what do we do as reviewers? Well, the format varies, but there are always comments to the authors. That's the major body of the review. Comments to the editors, that's usually a much smaller portion. Could be a checklist, could be text, but it should contain a recommendation to the editor whether to accept, revise, reject the manuscript. Some journals actually specify a format for the reviewer, so you should know that if you're reviewing for a specific journal, look and see if they have a requirement for a specific format. I will show you the format that I generally use if the journal does not have a specific format. What should be in your comment to the authors? Well, I think you should give the authors the benefit of the doubt, all right? Usually they're not trying to lie and cheat. Every once in a while they are, but most of the time they're not, all right? I try to be, we're going to give constructive criticism here, right? But I think it's important to make at least one positive comment, and I usually do that right up at the top, right? So this was an important question to consider. And thank you for designing a study to try to answer the question. The design may have been awful and they may have not answered the question, but at least they put their effort right into trying to do it. And so I think positive comments are always appreciated by authors. And we'll talk about open reviews in a second, but I think you should pretend that your reviews will be made public even if they aren't. And by the way, there are some journals who publish reviews too, okay? So you do not want to be ashamed of your review. You should not be writing comments that are not civil. I think our public discourse maybe has gone a little bit downhill in the last couple of years. I hope that's not true for our reviews, but we need to be respectful and civil to our authors and reviewers when we're writing the comments. So my general format is to start out with general comments, which is a summary of the work, all right? And in that, I specify whether I think this is a reasonable question to answer. Again, give the authors credit for trying to answer the question and summarize their results. So this is 3 or 4 sentences long. And then I have a section on major comments. And these are the things that I really think the authors need to address. Usually I will say, you have to address these or the study can't be published, right? These are the things that are of major concern. There are some, I have a section on minor comments, and this may be something like, I don't know, the p-values have to be reported to 3 significant digits, and all the p-values in the manuscript are 5 or 6 significant digits. So I'll put in the minor comments, please report the p-values to 3 significant digits, right? Specific comments are a list of things that are relevant to particular parts of the manuscript. We'll go over that in a second. And then the last part is the comments to the editor and my recommendation to the editor. So you can start out with, are the required elements present? And most journals, all journals, have a guide for authors or instructions for authors, and they tell the authors what's supposed to be in the manuscript. And part of your job as a reviewer is to check to see if those things are actually there, all All right. If you do a lot of reviewing for a particular journal, you will know what those things are. If you're an author for a journal, you'll know what those things are, right? And then I think a very good place to start are the reporting guidelines. So I'm sure that you have all heard of Consort and Strobe and Prospero, right? They are all reporting guidelines for different types of study designs. This is cut right from the guide for authors from IJOA, all right? And it's just the top part. It goes down even further. But the journal, and this is true for all reputable journals, right? They require that a randomized controlled trial, for example, have all the elements of the Consort checklist in it. Here's the beginning of that checklist, okay? And part of your job as a reviewer is to make sure that those elements are there and that they are correct. So I think these checklists are a great place to start, both as an author, how to write the manuscript. Okay, Dr. Bateman was mentioning the components of the manuscript. If you're reporting a randomized controlled trial, these components need to be there. If you're reviewing a randomized controlled trial, these components need to be there, right? All right, and this is just from a review article. I think it was in the British Medical Journal, which summarizes the contents of a thoughtful review. So looking at the title, does it clearly describe the manuscript? The Consort and the Strobe checklist, by the way, have requirements for the title, including that the study design has to be in the title. Abstract, does the abstract accurately summarize the manuscript? You'd be surprised how often it doesn't. Sometimes the numbers are even different than what's in the text, okay? But the conclusions in the abstract should should align with the conclusions in the text. These are the standard parts of an abstract, so I won't go through them all, but the introduction, I think, should have the hypothesis or the aim, okay? Methods need to briefly summarize what the methods are, and the results should be clearly described in logical sequence. So these are all, I think, readily apparent. Now, this is also cut from the IJOA Guide for Authors. Clinical trials, which are defined as a trial that has an intervention, have to be registered. And again, this is a requirement by all reputable journals these days. It has to be registered before they start, the authors, the investigators start trial recruitment, okay? So one of my jobs as a reviewer or an editor is to actually look at the dates, all right? And the second thing is, this is a big one, the methods in the clinical that are described in the trial registry need to align, be the same as the methods that are described in the manuscript. And you'd be surprised how often they are different, all right? Somehow along the way, the a priori sample size analysis or number has changed. The group definitions have changed. Things have changed. So this is one of the first things that I look at as a reviewer, because if these two things are different, I don't think there's any purpose of reviewing the rest of the manuscript, unless the authors can readily explain why they're different. And occasionally there's a legitimate reason that they're different, but that has to be explained in the manuscript. So this is one of the first things that I do as a reviewer. Okay. Looking at the results sections. I back up. So back to the introduction. There has to be a hypothesis in my mind for almost all studies that we do. And often the hypothesis is not clearly stated. Last sentence of the introduction in my mind has to be the aim hypothesis statement. Methods, as Dr. Bateman mentioned, have to be in enough detail so that we can replicate the study if we wanted to. And these days, studies have become so complicated that it's often hard to get the whole methods section into the word limit. And so that's what supplemental material are for. Okay, use it. As a reviewer, you need to also look at the supplemental material. Okay, results, are they clearly described in a logical sequence? Are the results reasonable, expected, and are the statistical methods selected appropriate? So all of these things, again, you're going over as a reviewer. Dr. Bateman talked about them as an author, but you're just looking to see that they're there. Figures and tables are important. You'd be surprised how often there are errors in the figures and tables. The numbers don't add up to 100%. The units are missing, lots of other issues with figures and tables. And so again, as a reviewer, that's one of the things that you look at. You know, there's this whole thing about, this is very much an aside, but work-life balance and getting your family life in your work life so that they are aligned. I used to actually give the tables to my children and make them add up all the numbers and make sure they added up to 100. They learned a lot of math that way. Okay, references. Check to make sure the references are correct. So Dr. Landau and I were having a discussion about this 2 weeks ago, that the authors will put in a recent study, and they cite the study, and you look at the study and it's from 2000. Now, I know that many of us older people would like to think that 2000 was recent. It wasn't. It's a quarter of a century ago, okay? So the references are quite often not appropriate to what the authors are stating. And so again, part of the job of the reviewer is to actually check that the references are appropriate. Okay, Brian talked about originality. I think that's important, but I also think there's a place for replication science. And so again, this is part of what you need to think about as a reviewer. Is it original? And if it's not original, is it important? Does it add to the original study that was out there? And what's the importance to readers? And is the interpretation of the results warranted? So this is a big, I don't want to call it a mistake, error. Authors often, they're so wrapped up in their work, right, that they over conclude. We all do the same thing. We want our work to be really important, and we get a result, and that, boy, we conclude this is the right result for everybody, right? When there are significant limitations to the result. So again, our job as reviewers to look at actually what the authors are concluding based upon their data, and determine whether or not the conclusion is warranted. Okay, so what's my actual process for reviewing? I read the whole paper once. I just read through it relatively quickly to get a gestalt for what it's about, okay? Then I go back and reread it carefully and make notes and comments, typing them out as I'm reading. As I'm reading, find the errors. Written comments of the reviewer should be numbered, so they're easy for the authors to respond to. And then before I send it off to the editor, I reread my comments once. I usually find an error or two, and I want to make sure it all fits together and it flows. And there's something actually in there. Again, you want the authors to be able to respond to your comments, right? So clarity in writing applies here too. Your comments have to be clear so that the authors actually know what you're asking them to do. It's not your job as a reviewer to fix the grammar, spelling, or formatting. Sometimes it's tempting, but it's not your job. This is just interesting data, I thought. Median time for review, 2.7 hours. A long time. You get faster the more you do it, okay? But this is not simple work. You can't do it in 15 minutes. And if you want to really do a good job, it's going to take an hour or two at least. Interesting question. Should your reviews differ for good and poor quality papers? Because you can take a poor quality paper, and if you review it like you review a good quality paper, that review will be 5 pages long, and it will take you 5 hours. Most of us don't have the time to do that. But I think part of our job and service to our profession is to help people who write papers that aren't going to be accepted or aren't good enough to be accepted to at least get better, right? It should be a learning activity for them, and it's part of our job as reviewers, I guess, to be the teachers here. So I think there has to be at least some information in your review that teaches the authors and helps them do better so that they can write a better paper the next time. I will, however, make a point that I am only bringing up some of the issues involved in this paper, right? So they don't think that these are the only issues involved in the paper. but point out the major ones so that they can learn from it. So I think that there is a difference between reviewing a good quality and a poor quality paper. Again, that's one of the reasons to read through it once at the beginning. You can get a pretty good idea whether or not you're going to recommend that this paper is going to be accepted, and maybe spend a little bit more time making sure that that one is really in top-notch form. Sometimes you may ask, should you review the same paper for a different journal? So I get a lot of the same papers, actually. I think my record is 4. Same paper sent to me by editors of all different journals, right? Because it's an area that I have expertise in. I will tell you, this is an author thing, but when you get a rejection from a journal, you should still pay attention to what the reviewers say. Don't turn the paper around and send it to the next journal without actually paying attention what the first reviewer said, okay? Because if I get that paper back as a reviewer the second time around and you haven't made any changes, I'm not too inclined to read it the second time. So I usually ask the editor if they want me to review it again. So if I've gotten it from a previous journal, I will tell Dr. Landau, I've already seen this paper. Do you want me to look at it again? And they may say yes or no. Okay, most of editors will return revised papers back to the reviewer, okay, unless it's a very minor revision that's being asked for. The paper will be sent back to you as a reviewer, and you need to look at it one more time and make a recommendation again, whether this is the form that should be accepted or it needs more work. I usually read the responses by the authors and then read the paper fresh. So look at it one more time with a fresh set of eyes. Okay, a couple of tips. Read the editor's invitation to review. All right, I know Dr. Landau, Professor Leslie in the back of the room does this, writes me a little note that says, take a look at this, please, okay? Read that note. It's a templated email, so sometimes the tendency is just to not read the email, but usually there's a line in the top that's addressed specifically to the paper. So take a look at that. I think if the journal doesn't have a template, develop your own template. Just pull it up every time, use the same template. We talked about familiarity with the journal's guidelines and reviewing guidelines and checking the trial registry. I think I just had a couple last slides here on whether or not reviews should be signed or not. Different journals have different policies. It's the general policy, I think, of most journals still and most anesthesiology journals that reviews don't need to be signed. Some of them say they shouldn't be signed, and some will allow the reviewers to sign them or not, all right? There's discussion about this. What's the pro of signing the review? Well, if your name's on it, you're more likely to be thoughtful, perhaps, take credit for what you wrote. It exposes possible conflicts of interest, and it's kind of fair, right? If someone's going to criticize your work, to know who that person is. The cons of doing that are sometimes reviewers don't want to be known, so it's hard to find reviewers who will be open. There is a power dynamic in reviewing, right? Because often the expert is somebody senior, and the other way around. Sometimes the expert is somebody junior to the author of the manuscript, and they're a little bit worried about writing critical comments to someone who is in a power dynamic with. If it's open reviews, sometimes they're not completely candid, and they could be timid. And the other way around too, there could be some mutual back scratching going on in nepotism. And so again, the reviews aren't candid and thorough. I usually sign my reviews, but I'm old and I have gray hair. Some of the journals will take my name off. Some of them will leave my name on. Again, some reviewers, we didn't talk about publishing the reviews, but some journals also publish the reviews, right? So everything is open, and you probably want to know that before you get started. So thank you very much for your attention, and happy to answer questions.
So before we take questions, I wanted to reflect. I hope this was a helpful review on how to write, how to review and the publisher's side. I wanted, and not to put you on the spot, I wanted to give my quick tips, and I'll do it quickly. Best writing tip. I was told by my mentor, who was actually an editor in the New England Journal of Medicine 30 years ago, that when a reviewer and an editor looks at the paper, he told me he was doing it on a plane when the flight was taking off with a scotch, and that the only thing he looked at before doing a desk reject, which can also happen, which is not sending it for peer review, but the editor writing some short reviews, was to look at the last sentence of the introduction and the first sentence of the discussion. And if this didn't tell the full story, then he wasn't going to read the full paper. So without putting you on the spot, I took your paper from 25 years ago. So that was yesterday. That's a recent paper. And guess what? You did it right. So this is the last paragraph of the introduction, right before the methods. We designed this trial to compare the rate of cesarean delivery in nulliparous women in spontaneous labor or with spontaneous rupture of membranes who requested analgesia early in labor and were randomly assigned to receive intrathecal or systemic opioid analgesia. What they did, what you looked at. The sentence is a bit long, but it's very clear. And then the discussion, first sentence, in this randomized trial, intrathecal opioid analgesia as compared with systemic opioid analgesia in early labor did not increase the rate of cesarean delivery. You changed practice. So read that paper as a model of how to write your paper. Dr. Bateman's
But there are some things in that
model.
paper I would do differently now, by the way.
Okay, but look at that, 25 years ago. Okay, the review process. So as an author, you probably received reviews from reviewer 1, reviewer 2, maybe reviewer 3, and at the end you end up with a suggestion that your hamburger should have some Oreos and I don't know what else is in there, but it looks disgusting. It is true that you might have different reviewers tell you different things. It is the role of the editor to put it back together so that these reviews make sense. And, you know, the handling editor or the editor-in-chief will probably tell you, do this or do that, or as Dr. Wong does and as I do, we go into your manuscript and we put comments. And yes, we will tell you that maybe you don't have to do this, or you know, because reviewer 2 told you to, you know, replicate the study in elephants before you resubmit your paper. You don't have to do that. The idea is that you have to keep the clarity. And poor Mona Lisa, look at all these things. So the review process, again, is going to be iterative, and read everything, particularly from the handling editor. And again, the reviewers shouldn't be telling you that you have a typo here, because sometimes a journal has a specific writing style. And the review is telling you to write cesarean section everywhere. And in IJOA, we've decided to have it cesarean delivery. So just sort of look at the guide for authors and what the editor has the last say. And in terms of publishing, this is the landscape. We are all trying in every journal not to have the team look like this when the paper is submitted, and at the end of it, look like this. So I just want to say that this is the responsibility of the reviewers, and the reviewers here. When you receive a paper, most journals will tell you, please answer right away. You can do it on the day you receive the revision. Don't wait until 10 days later to say, I'm not going to review this. Get the invitation, say no, thank you, say yes, please. And then journals have reduced the timeline because we want the research to be relevant. So for some journals, it's very short. For IJOA, the reviewers need to respond within 5 days or they get booted out, and they need to review within 15 days. For the revisions, it's the same thing. It is much shorter. The goal is to have your paper published out fast, and for the journals, that's the editorial landscape, to have your paper online within the day of the acceptance. And this is what most journals do. We didn't leave much time for questions, but maybe we can take a few questions if you have any. And thank you for being here.
Could the panel discuss what they see as an appropriate role for AI in this whole process?
Okay. So I'm happy to take and then let you. So AI in the writing or the reviewing, I'll tell you one thing. Dr. Wong alluded to it. I see a huge problem with AI being used to write the introduction for, it doesn't matter if it's an RCT, a review article, a case report. And we mentioned it that the references might not be appropriate, but in many ways they might be, AI might be hallucinating, so references don't even exist. Or the reference exists but doesn't support the statement. Or the reference does support the statement but is so old they're much better papers than the one that, whatever it is, ChatGPT, Perplexity, whatever it is that you're using. So this is something that we're paying attention a lot. You can use AI to improve the readability of your manuscript. You have to disclose it. You have to disclose as an author, what you used, where you used it, and that you take ownership on your responsibility on reviewing, including the references of what is written. So that's one way. You can use, you have to disclose, and you have to check. ChatGPT is not writing your paper. As a reviewer, there is a huge potential for AI to support the reviews. There's a huge role for AI to support the editors. Like a lot of what we do, the checklist, is the trial registered? We're not using it yet, and I think different publishers will, provide guidelines. IJOA had a fascinating webinar, which is actually available on our website, given by our publisher, on the good, the bad, the ugly of AI in the editorial landscape. We did it in April, and actually there's so much since April that has evolved that we're going to do another one before the end of this year. There's still not sufficient safety and security for things that are not accepted for publication to not make it into the public domain. So for example, someone does an RCT, the paper is not accepted, or worse, would be fraudulent, but you used an AI engine to review it, it would go into the public domain when this is a paper that should not be published. So these are the issues and the technicalities that the publishers are working on. But I do think that it's moving so fast that probably by next year, we will be able to utilize some AI engines to do some of the pre-screening for fraud, plagiarism, errors, etc., in the process of the review and the publishing. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I don't think I don't really have anything to add. I think, for authors, probably the in the current state, the appropriate use would be to edit the author's own language, not to generate content, but to edit. And if you use it in that fashion, it needs to be disclosed, and you need to check the journal's policies. I think journals are most now have pretty clear policies. About
all good journals have policies that you have to disclose. We had an editors meeting yesterday. Some of you are here in the room. We discussed that. There are words that are actually triggers, flags for us to know that you used AI. I found out, I did not know, that delve. When the word delve is in your manuscript, because I don't know if you use it, I've never used it, but it's something that ChatGPT and the other engines will put in a text. So I'll know now to look for delving. I don't think I've ever seen it. So, but we recognize. So sometimes it's favorable for language editing for the non-English native speaking authors, but you recognize it. It reads fake. It reads wrong. It's not how you would say things. So you have to use it with a lot of caution. I think for grammar, wonderful. Yeah. But again, the references still hallucinate. And it goes from non-existent references to references that exist but don't say that. Or to references that are not the one you would, if you want to say that epidurals don't increase the C-section rate, don't put a review article that cites Dr. Wong's paper. Put Dr. Wong's paper, even if it's an old one. We would still consider that to be the appropriate reference rather than a review article published in an obscure journal that referred to Dr. Wong's paper. So there's an etiquette, and there is, it's scientific rigor, it's robustness. And I think these are the papers that I can tell you, I struggle the most. I recently, this week, took a paper, changed all the references because we were going back and forth, 5th revision, and the authors are still not putting the references that it seems so obvious to be supporting their statements. I just suggested them because there wasn't any other way of getting them to do the right thing.
On the research side, for example, I will predict that within a year, the need for a statistician in designing a study and analyzing it will be much less because AI will be able to assist with that. It's very helpful right now in terms of looking for gaps in the literature, in terms of reviewing what's already out there, and then refining the study design and so forth. So before you get to the writing, when you're still doing the research, it has a huge role. How much of that has to be disclosed when you're...
All of it, every step. So in the methods section, so there's always on the title page you're supposed to disclose, but in the methods, if you're using AI to design your study, you have to disclose not just that you use, but you have to disclose what you used, at which step you used. And I don't know what you think about statistics, but
others are trying to get in the room.
no.
So
One last, do you want to answer about the statistical part?
I don't think it's at a stage yet where it can substitute for a statistician. Yeah. Who knows? In 2 years, who knows? Things are moving quickly.
Thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to receiving your superbly written and analyzed papers.